Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll be starting in just a minute, giving everyone a chance to join. Everyone, thank you for joining. My name is Aaron Friedman. I'm with Connected Real Estate. Thank you for attending the show. We really appreciate it, and for tuning into our smart buildings. What are they in reality and what are they not? I would like to thank Anixter and the rest of our panelists as well as our sponsors. I'd like to introduce to you today our moderator, Steve Anson from Anixter. Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Aaron, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's session on smart buildings. What are they in reality and what are they not? My name is Steve Anson from Anixter, the Customer Solutions team, and I'll be your moderator for this session. And I'd like to welcome our subject matter experts for this topic from Honeywell, Microsoft, Intelligent Buildings, and Thoughtwire, where we will discuss the definition of a smart building in today's environment and the best practices for a smart building strategy. Let's kick this session off with Emmanuel Daniel from Microsoft. Thank you for joining us today. And as the Director of Applied Innovation and Incubation, Smart Buildings and Campuses, before we actually get into the defining what is a smart building, the question I have for you is, we need to remind ourselves, is why do we have buildings in the first place?
Thank you, Steve, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel. The whole reason we have buildings is all about physical space. Physical space provides an opportunity for people to come together, to collaborate, to engage, okay, to innovate. And that actually is a great place for someone to share ideas and to build upon ideas. Without the possibility of physical space, there is no interaction, there is no productivity gained, because people don't communicate, they don't talk, they don't engage. And that's what physical space does for us today. It provides the avenue for us to connect with one another.
Yeah, I think it's important to establish that the fact that we are, or at the moment, perhaps not using these places, but we are going back to them. And Tom, as the co-founder of Intelligent Buildings and over 15 years of being singularly focused on the topic of smart buildings, I figure you should be able to give us some clarity to the question of what is a smart building and what is it not?
Yeah, maybe I'll strangely start with the not, and I build on what Emmanuel said with this first X here, that a lot of times people think about smart buildings, they develop totally new metrics of things they're searching for or going to measure for, and they really kind of forget the purpose as Emmanuel described it, but even also the purpose of what they're doing. Are you in the business to write software code? Are you educating students? Are you practicing law? You know, what's your organizational purpose? And smart buildings should be accruing to that, as opposed to some technical nebulous measurements. And similar to that, in doing that, sometimes people get too focused on systems and features. It may be a habit that we all have, rather than these outcomes and these experiences like Emmanuel was talking about. And then the other thing that can sometimes be a myth or a wrong approach is that smart buildings always cost more. And so then they start looking at these silo approaches of the ROI. This lighting control system has a 10-month ROI. This analytics package has a 6-month ROI. And rather than saying, if you're talking about the financial side of it, what is this doing to my real estate cost structure, both my capital cost structure, my operational cost structure? So, you know, just a few things that we ought to keep in mind at a higher level.
I like that, Tom, the idea of a lower structure. It seems that most, when they go on this journey looking for a smart building, they go into this RFI, RFQ, technology evaluation mode and start comparing systems and features like you just referred to. Is it true that the focus should be more on the actual business use cases and actual desired outcomes?
Yeah, and I think that's you know, when you mention RFP and those kind of things, that, you know, that's not the place to start for smart buildings, because the best you could end up with is a bunch of cool point solutions. I say, I need something that does this. again, pretty narrow. So if you think about it from a use case scenario, and let's just grab one from the headlines today. If I wanted a touchless experience because of the public health situation, it's hard to do an RFP for that because it might involve your access control system, an automated door, your elevator system, and maybe digital signage. So your use case is a touchless experience there. And then also, you know, buildings have become historically more of a liability than an enhancer. In other words, we have many digital building control systems out there in the world that are internet connected by many different contractors without any kind of central standards. And that becomes a liability. On the other hand, what we want to do is make those building systems part of a more secure, more safe, and a more healthy, including public health environment.
That's probably a nice segue, Betsy, as the global market leader for cybersecurity at Honeywell. When it comes to a smart building, one of Tom's expectations is it needs to be safe and secure. What, therefore, is a secure building and what is it not?
Right. So thank you, Stephen. Hello, everyone. Excited to be here, and I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. It's a great question. So we think about safety and security. We primarily think about physical security or life safety products. So what we're seeing is really it's becoming important to look at a new layer of security, which is operational technology, that is OT cybersecurity. So our industry is getting more and more connected with the increase in IoT devices connecting to cloud, whether it's smart sensors. And because of this, data is becoming very critical. In the past few months, globally, we actually have seen an increase in cyber hacks, primarily around ransomware or other types of hacks. We're seeing some data around 75% in the past few months. Security Magazine, came out with a data point. And some of the historical attacks were due to gaps in the OT network. So hackers would use the SCADA backdoor to enter into the system. Hence, it's becoming increasingly important for us to secure our OT network for cyber threats and to look at smart buildings holistically. So for example, cameras, right? So we're expecting cameras to be multifunctional and to people counting, thermal scanning, and have built-in analytics. So initially the goal for a camera was to detect and deter crime. And now it's to provide all these great analytics and insights and this new norm, even social distancing insight. So these cameras are connected to the OT network. So securing the OT network from a cyber hack is becoming increasingly important since now you have a lot of data that has been collected, and we all know data is power.
Great, Betsy, and I think that vulnerability is now a very important topic in the smart building conversation. And Tom, I know recently Intelligent Buildings has started up a cybersecurity practice for specifically OT. Anything you can add to what Betsy referred to there?
Well, first, I would agree with what Betsy said. It's really important, and maybe just add that what we spend the most time on in the OT cybersecurity, the building control cybersecurity environment, is with the contractors and the way they maintain and configure the systems. So I totally agree with Betsy. You've got to have the network secure, and especially the remote access. But then there's this whole other side with many individual fragmented contractors that configure their systems. So outside of the IT situation, they've got passwords, they've got backup, they've got keeping current software, they've got user credentials from people that hadn't worked in the building in 2 years, these kind of things. So I would just add that dimension of all of the contractors' fragmented configuration. It's something tough to deal with, but we need to go to that level.
So let's keep that in mind as we go through this conversation and the topic of safety, security, and healthy buildings. But let's go back to some of the things we just talked about. Kyle, thanks for joining us today as the Smart Building Specialist from Thoughtwire, focused on digital twin technology, but you seem to have a very good grasp of what's going on in the smart building space. So let's go back to what Emmanuel was talking about with the organizational purpose. How would you rank, I've got some topics up here on the screen, the importance of some of these smart building goals?
Sure. And Steve, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to participate in today's panel with so many smart individuals. You know, I think you have to look at this. And if I was to ask that question to 3 different personas within an organization, if I was to ask that question to the IT professional, to the head of workplace, and then the head of sustainability, I guarantee you're going to get 3 very different answers to this. You know, when I look at the different topics that you have up here, you know, historically, and if you look at the main cost drivers in operating a building, you look at things like energy consumption, you look at labor, and then you look at janitorial and portering. Those are the primary cost drivers in, for example, a high density office building. So that, you know, when you look at 1 and 2, you look at energy conservation, you look at operational efficiency, that's always going to be there. That's always going to be a high priority. But I think you also have to look at, you know, what's going on in the environment, what's going on economically, what's going on organizationally. And I think you're going to see a shifting scale of these 5 topics, both from depending on who you talk to and what is actually going on. If you look at the last 5 years, the trend has all been focused around occupant experience or tenant experience. How do we curate that experience? How do we you know, obtain and retain top talent for our clients or our tenant base? Or if you're an employer, or you're, you know, the talent that you're trying to acquire and retain. But now you look at what's going on today with COVID, and everything, all the conversation has shifted. So now all the use cases around touchless and making sure people aren't within a certain distance from each other. You know, how do I validate that and verify for my employee base when they start, or the tenant base when they start coming back to the office? How do I ensure that they feel safe, that they know it's been sanitized and clean, that it's okay to work in this environment that I'm providing as a product to the tenants? So you're constantly seeing the shift in priority across these 5 items. So again, depending on what's going on economically, depending on what's going on environmentally and situationally, and what's going on specific to that organization, whether I'm talking to an owner operator or I'm talking to an employer, an enterprise company, this is going to vary every single time that question's asked.
So that's great advice. These goals do vary, and they depend on each person's situation. I suppose if we now just get a little bit more into the pragmatic side of the discussion, Tom, maybe to you, not sure, in order to get a smart building foundation, we need to get this plumbing sorted. We've all heard it, you've named it and even registered it, the conversation, or the theme of what is called the 4th utility. For our audience, if you don't mind explaining what you define as to be the 4th utility, and why is it so important to get a common converged infrastructure in place?
Sure. So Steve, we called it the 4th utility because those in the real estate design and development and property management world understand very well that gas, water, and electricity utilities require a common standard infrastructure in a building. That's well understood. And what we've all been talking about here, and what we all know for the past decade or so in the building space, is that data is now that 4th utility, and it needs a 4th utility infrastructure in it. And what we're talking about in sort of common terms is a backbone, as you mentioned, just a data backbone, because all control systems require the same basic connectivity: server, cables, networking, floor level, patch panels. All these things are required. You don't need 6 or 8 or 10 of them that are separate standards. You should have one with common standards, and for a couple quick reasons. One is it's a lot easier to get the data that we're talking about in your chart here. 2, obviously, it creates that physical opportunity for integration and interoperability. And 3, it is much easier to manage a cyber secure environment when you have one proper IT network rather than multiple scattered networks. So again, to summarize that is just like the utility approach that developers take for the first 3 utilities. And we think it's time that's the same as done here, and has been for a decade or so.
Thanks, Tom. That makes a lot of sense. But maybe if I ask Emmanuel from Microsoft, is this true from an end user point of view? And how do you get what you need from a converged 4th utility type infrastructure?
This is absolutely true, Steve, and I completely agree with what Tom said. Where we are headed today is about converged infrastructure that enables both the powering of the device and collecting of data from the device. So what is happening is buildings today are becoming massive sources of data collection. Now, how are you going to collect that data? How are you going to change the type of data you would collect based on the changing demographics of people who come into that building? And how are you able to place devices anywhere across the building without having to redesign your core infrastructure is what converged infrastructure allows us to do. Such as a simple example would be having a smart ceiling. Smart ceiling is not just about lights anymore. It's about powering the lights, using that same power over Ethernet cables that you have to also power the devices that collect the data, and then using that data across multiple systems to provide the experiences that you want to people in that space, and consuming that experience and being more productive in that space. So driving that level of experience through the power of converged infrastructure is what a smart building is all about. It's a key enabler for making a building smart.
I like it, a key enabler. So let's dive in a little bit more into the weeds here, Betsy. As it relates to connected real estate, the event we're participating in for these 2 days, there is an opportunity that we have to bring IT and OT systems together. Can you talk us to the right side of the equation here on how OT, which is operational technology, is becoming a lot more network friendly?
Sure, Steve. So in the past, IT and OT was managed by different teams, and to a certain extent, we still see that in the market. And you also had a clear demarcation that the facility managers made the OT decisions while the IT managers made decisions about the IT network. However, we have seen a trend where a number of these devices, as you pointed out, are now connecting to cloud or becoming smart and getting hosted on their OT network. So what we're seeing here is a convergence in this space, and I know Emmanuel mentioned that, Tom also mentioned that. So more OT devices are being made, more OT decisions actually are collaboratively being made with the IT teams, or the IT teams are increasingly engaging with the OT teams. And this is really important, right? Because ultimately you have to look at buildings holistically, and you have to protect your data holistically. And so with this, increase in this, the wireless thermostats, the edge sensors, intelligent lighting, which are all becoming frictionless and connecting to cloud. And this particular trend will continue to see. So
thanks, Betsy. I think we lost the last a bit of friction on the last comment, but maybe if we balance this conversation with Kyle, can you address the other side, the left side of the equation with the IT, and more importantly, maybe describe how the facilities teams can learn from IT in order to achieve the integration of things?
Yeah, so if you think about the world of IT, you got a lot of different hats that are being worn on the IT side of the fence. So you've got your network people, you've got your CTO, your CIO, your applications folks. But I think IT as a whole, they're always thinking ecosystem. They're always thinking about, as we're evaluating new technologies, is this new technology going to fit into our ecosystem? And the IT side of the fence, these guys are always, they're living in a world of APIs, right? Where we're talking about data portability, we're talking about the sharing of that data. Am I able to leverage the data that's coming from source A and utilize it to gain additional insights and provide more streamlined operations and processes in a new system or system B, right? And where the OT side of the world traditionally has been riddled with data silos, and up until just very recent times, we've been able to start unlocking all of that with different technologies like digital twin and normalizing data, bring everything into a central data store. I think the facility side of the house can very much learn. And now that you're, as Betsy articulated just a moment ago, about looking at the building holistically, and I think the facilities team can look to the IT team and understanding the interconnectivity, looking at, okay, well, now I have my BAS, my HVAC, my lighting, my UPS, my elevator. This is all part of a larger ecosystem. If I can aggregate that data, I can put everything into a central data store. I can normalize that data. Now we can gain context. We can understand what's really going on in this building. And just like, over the last number of years, the IT group has been doing with the software solutions they've been utilizing for the last 10, 15 years.
Right, and you talked a bit about their operating in silos and looking at things more holistically. Emmanuel, to make a smart building happen, we have to break down those silos, and we need to look at the building systems as a whole. and understand how they relate to each other to enjoy perhaps the sum of the parts. A key component to that is the introduction of what we're calling here a technology prime or a master systems integrator. Can you elaborate on what is an MSI and why is their role so important today?
Sure, Steve, and that's a great question. When we talk about a smart building, ultimately, buildings have always been collecting data. Buildings have always had multiple systems. To make them smart is all about driving that value from the perception of the people who consume the space in that building. And that value can only be achieved if we are able to coordinate the flow of data across multiple systems. That is, breaking your conventional silo-based design into an integrated design. So you have, let's say, access, you have fire systems, you have HVAC. They're all designed independently. No one talks about what information do I need to share between my access management system and my parking system and my navigation system to get me from the parking lot through the doors into the meeting room and to find the person that I want. To orchestrate that flow of data means integrating across these systems and breaking these silos. And that's what an MSI does. The MSI comes in, he looks at systems holistically and defines the data flow from system to system so people can consume an experience that is completely integrated rather than going to different systems for different activities. And that becomes a key aspect today in a smart building. It's about integrated data flow for the benefit of the occupants that consume the service.
Yeah, I think this MSI a very key part of the today's ecosystem. And if we pictorialize what an ecosystem could be, and going back to what Kyle was referring to with the collaboration of IT and OT, how they think, as always, or perhaps as now as a result of they're creatures of their environment and in the way it was originally designed. But today we have a new opportunity, the ability to collect and unlock data and information in our buildings in a way that we could not do in the past. So back to you maybe, Kyle, what does this mean to not only what is a smart building, but what it can be?
Sure. So now that we have technologies that are able to aggregate and normalize this data, when I think about a smart building, I look at the data as the foundation, right? The data is the foundation of what I consider a truly intelligent building that enables, and if you have a mature organization that's working with you that has the tooling to put the point solutions and leverage this normalized data, now we can look at beginning to achieve and accomplish the use cases and outcomes that these consulting firms or these organizations have as part of their overall vision. So if you think about starting at the foundation of this, of the IT systems, the OT systems, the people, the processes, these are all historically siloed data points that companies have had a challenge in bringing together and actually achieving the outcomes that they're looking for. So if you think about over the last 5 to 10 years, you have organizations that have come to life that have built out connectors that are enabled to have bidirectional communication with these underlying technologies, aggregate that data into a central data store and normalize that data. And then if you think about our organization, for example, over the last 11 years, we've built out a connector factory that's in excess of over 250 connectors, and that grows with every single project that we do. But we are also able to semantically tag that data associated, which is going to enable us to be able to add context and reasoning to what is actually going on in real time in that building. So this begins some of the key foundational components when you start getting into the world of organizational digital twins, which can unlock and enable a lot of what these companies are trying to accomplish and actually enable them to realize the ROI that they are originally hoping for when they're investing in all of these smart or intelligent technologies that at the end of the day are nothing more than point solutions.
So there seems to be a lot of what we can do and concepts here and discussions, and I know everyone's got some practical examples, but Kyle, in everything you're describing there, why is it that we've not rolled out all these solutions as mainstream and buildings are not already in that plug and play mode?
Well, a couple of different, one, it's not easy to do. And I think it really depends on the maturity of the organization, both from a vendor perspective and from a client perspective or end user perspective. You know, a lot of organizations are still trying to figure out their vision. They're at different different points in the digital transformation life cycle. So I can't tell you how many times I get into rooms with companies and we don't even have the IT team, the security team, the workplace team, and operational team in the same room collaborating to build out this vision to get to the end goal. So there's that barrier that hinders the ability for this to be adopted. Then you have other situations where just a lot of the technology vendors have different perspectives and different ways of how you can achieve those end goals. So I think for the most part, it just has to do with organizational and vendor maturity.
That makes sense. Maturity does answer that. I suppose, Tom, Schircliff, Intelligent Buildings. Why is there not more intelligent buildings?
Yeah, I definitely there's a cultural issue that Kyle was alluding to, and a technical issue, but also I would say, getting back to an earlier point, is that even if you enable and normalize and do all these things for data, it's a little bit like, dog chases car and then catches car. Now what? Okay, so I've spent all this time and money because I've just got to have data, but I was missing my metrics or my use case or tying it to the highest purpose of the organization. So I think some of us in the industry are a little bit guilty of just talking about data as inherently good, which could be true, but not unless you manifest it for a result and for a purpose. So I would agree with Kyle that there's a significant cultural issue, and by the way, fragmentation is the problem in real estate. Just briefly, Steve, the HVAC contractor typically doesn't manage the parking control system, who typically doesn't manage the sub-metering system. So you've got a reality in real estate today that you've got tremendous fragmentation. And so it takes a very, I think Kyle and Emmanuel both alluded to this, takes a very strong organizational leadership and purpose to get to the data because all of that ecosystem has to roll up to that command, if you will.
Yeah, that's back to the business use case. Thanks, Tom. And I don't think we can have this conversation today, Kyle, without addressing the topic of a digital twin. Seeing you being the expert on the topic here in the group, can you explain what is a digital twin as it relates to smart buildings?
So it's this is a question right now. It's a really fresh buzzword in prop tech, right? And what it does is you've got different organizations coming out utilizing that terminology that they are providing digital twin. This creates a lot of confusion in the market. It causes challenges for organization evaluating this technology and looking to adopt it. Of what's the ROI, what's the value, what can I get from a digital twin? Now, first and foremost, I think organizations need to understand that there are different types of digital twins out there. You have the historical version of a digital twin where it got its start, which is a digital representation of a physical asset, something like an oil derrick, an engine, a transmission, right? That is very static data. It's just that digital representation of that. Then you start looking at bringing in and bridging multiple data points, and you start getting into composite digital twins. Now, composite digital twin is when you start hearing companies talk about, we can bring everything together, IT, OT, IoT. We have this nice 2D, 3D visualization tool. We have some analytics around it. Oftentimes those types of companies are also coming and saying, well, we can have a BIM model, and then we can put some tagging on top of that and then show this nice, pretty vision of that BIM model. But again, you're still focused on just the static assets, right? Then you start looking at process digital twins. Now, process digital twins really is all about friction points, workflows, processes, what's going on in real time in that building with the people. And then the people themselves are another critical data point that is part of that digital twin. And so the highest hierarchy of digital twin as it pertains to built environment, you look at organizational digital twins. In Thoughtwire, this is where we like to play, this is where you bridge everything that is physical asset, IT, OT, IoT, processes, and people. But there are some key components that you need to enable. Once you bring all of those data points together, you normalize that data, you semantically tag that data, is what do you do with that data, right? And the foundations of this organizational digital twin, you have to have the data, you have to have well-defined KPIs, you have to have reasoning, you have to have context, it needs to be real time before you really achieve this kind of nirvana of organizational digital twin that's going to unlock all the value in a smart building and enable all of these, next generation use cases that are being asked of by the client. So I think that is where we have to start is get people understanding and thinking differently about what a digital twin is and the different stages or different types of digital twins. So for a built environment, if you're trying to bring together a full ecosystem and you want to create an ecosystem that is replicable, building by building, regardless of what your underlying infrastructure looks like, and you want to curate a common experience for employees and operations professionals, that organizational digital twin is what you want to aspire to. And you have great organizations like Tom's organization, Intelligent Buildings, that can help hold your hand, guide you, and build out that vision on where do you go from today and where you currently sit, and how do you get to this organizational digital twin, this future state of where you want to be, that encompasses everything from your digital workplace platform, your operations, and your just day-to-day occupant experience.
Very interesting topic, this one, and there's a lot to unpack, and thanks for that clearer definition there, Kyle. Emmanuel, what does this mean to you, and as you're looking to support the needs of occupants and operators within your Microsoft campuses?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Steve. And I think I'll describe it really well. When we look at a digital twin, ultimately for us, it's about two views of it. One, digital twin in the perspective of visualizing the space and the building. What does the building look like? What is it? How does it shape up? How is the space going to be consumed? And two is digital twin in terms of the data. How do we model every bit of data coming out of that building so we can understand the data, to Tom's point, okay, interpreting that data to be able to drive intelligent actions as an outcome of it. So we call it a spatial digital twin, which is all about understanding how the space is modeled, how the space is consumed, and a data digital twin, which is about taking the data, putting it on that space, understanding how that space is performing, how that space is working. Is that space driving engagement? Is that space driving collaboration? Is that space being utilized effectively? Yeah, and using that to be able to cater to the needs of the occupants or anyone who comes into contact with the building is what digital twin is in terms of how we are consuming it today to drive better experiences.
Nice way to bring it back around to that business use case. Thanks, Emmanuel. One thing we should think about is we are on a journey here. It's not about the destination. And maybe Betsy, can you share from your point of view what a business requires in order to be prepared for executing on a smart building program?
Yeah, so Steve, to be prepared to execute on smart building, you really have to take a again, going back to the point of look at it holistically, like fire, safety, building management system. But in order to minimize business disruption, right, especially what we have seen in the past few months of what has happened in the market. But coming from an OT cyber perspective, it's important for our customers to have, or even potential customers or the owners of these buildings to have an incident readiness plan, or clients to have an incident readiness plan. So whenever a cyber breach takes place, they're ready, their teams are ready to know what are the next steps. So in our industry, we say it's not a matter of who, but when a cyber breach will take place. So similar to the CIA tried for IT, it's important to know the CIA tried for OT, which is availability, integrity, and confidentiality, right? So it differs because the availability of the systems, especially because building management systems is so important for the operation of an entire building, and especially when it comes to critical, buildings, such as if you have like an airport or some of the government facilities, becomes very critical to ensure optimal operation. So some of the recommendations typically are, you follow a predefined protocol for incident response, which includes knowing who to contact. So knowing your key stakeholders that needs to be notified at the client side, at the supplier side, when an incident takes place. The second thing would be to restore service, right? Such that there's minimal business disruption. containing affected systems from further damage of data loss. You really need to make sure, that you're minimizing that impact to your data. So for example, if it's a malware attack, of course you're trying to eradicate the malware, but you're also trying to contain and quarantine and protect your data. Preserving forensic data, you need that data to, further do data due diligence. So ensuring data backup to make sure that you can have your system up and running in a seamless fashion if that were to happen. And then finally would be a detailed analysis and report out of the incident, the lessons learned, and the best practices for future risk mitigation. Because, again, we go back to this whole point of, data being power, and really important for us to protect the data, protect the operations of our buildings, especially some of the critical buildings, and ensure like our businesses are not impacted.
So that covers very well said, Betsy, as it relates to managing risk and risk mitigation on this journey that we're on. But Emmanuel, in the whole scheme of the smart building approach, we've got to be careful what we wish for, right? Delivering on, executing on a smart building wish list can be opening a can of worms. How do we ensure we meet our goals and stay on target with our objectives?
So that's a great point, Steve. And there have been cases which I've witnessed where people tend to get a bit overboard with what the expectations of a smart building are, and they deliver nothing. So for us, it's about understanding the occupants of that building. Different buildings have different purposes. They have different objectives. So to start with a smart building, who is going to occupy that building? How are they going to consume that space, and what matters from them? Using that as a priority will start dictating the experiences you need to cater for in that building. These experiences will then filter down and start catering towards the core infrastructure that needs to go into the building, how these systems need to be chosen, how they need to be integrated. Once that is done, it's all about choosing the right system, integrating those systems, managing those data flows, and finally providing a service that matters most to the occupants of the building. The last thing we want to do is create a service that nobody in the building wants to consume, and the building no longer has any value of being called a smart building. It's just a building with bells and whistles. So to overcome that, start with the occupants, understand their desires, focus on their experiences, build up the systems that then caters to that data, and weave all that data together to provide a seamless experience for them.
So let's dive into that occupant experience a little bit further. Based on everything you're saying, smart buildings are all about the occupant. Can you walk us through the various phases, perhaps, that the occupant enjoys throughout a smart building setting?
Sure. The key thing is, as owners of buildings and people that go into buildings, it's not about the building alone. It's about the journey to the building. So the experience for the occupant starts right from their home, from the airport, wherever they would like to originate. How am I going to get to the building? What is the best way to get to the building? What are the options? What are the choices that I have, right? So we're actually starting to delight them from the point of origination rather from when they touch the building directly. So how do I get to the building? Once I come to the building, if I choose to park, where do I park? And what is the choice of parking spot I would like to pick at? Now, if I'm running into a building and the biggest challenge has always been, I would like to find the parking spot that is closest to the door. But it's not always about finding that spot, right? And we can go around in circles. So having the experience that says that if you want to make your meeting on time, choose this parking lot. This gives you 5 minutes from the parking lot down to the door. Yeah, and from the door to the room, you have a couple of minutes left for you to freshen up before you attend that meeting. So driving that holistic view of understanding the needs of what is being done is something that everybody loves. And once they get into the building, we always try to encourage people to go on self-discovery, learn about the building, learn about the surroundings, learn about what's happening. People are always curious. Engaging that curiosity and driving that engagement by using, augmented reality, virtual reality, and say, hey, why don't you learn about what's happening in the building? Why don't you learn about what's happening in the space around you? And if you come to Washington, there's always beautiful trees wherever you go. Learn about the trees. Why are these trees so unique? What is so special about them? Engaging the occupant and the user drives that level of experience, which is much more and beyond what technology can do. Once they start doing that, we then start getting on, okay, what do I have to do to drive better engagement of the people I would like to meet? How do I drive that productivity? Choosing a space that aligns to the type of meeting and goal they want to get. Space is not just about space. I've got collaboration space, I've got silent space, I've got brainstorming space, I've got learning space. What do you want to accomplish for your time and purpose in that building? Choosing that space and dynamically being able to configure that space to meet your demands is what a smart building is all about. Finally, at the end of the day, I may have something that I've been thinking about, but I just don't know how to get started on that idea. And that's what we start terming accidental collisions. The space has been designed. So if you are an innovator who's trying to get your idea off the ground, what are the right people you should bump into while you are in that building? And how does the space support you having random, ad hoc, dynamic, collaborative sessions rather than planned meetings? Because ultimately, it's not about planning everything. It's about the accidental meetings that drive the highest levels of interaction, brainstorming, and productivity. Empowering users to have the opportunity to do that in the space that they are at during the time that they choose to visit that space is what a smart building is. And finally, at the end of the day, how am I going to get back home in the easiest, most shortest, efficient way? So you would notice, Steve, in all the experiences, it's not one system or two systems. It's all building systems coming together, weaving across data from multiple touch points and using those touch points to provide a service that takes care of the occupant all the way from coming to the building and departing from the building.
Very well said. And Emmanuel, it was no accident that we bumped into you. We actually sought you out because of exactly what you just described. And I think you've established everyone's curiosity, but how do we take those thoughts, ideas, and the selection of concepts there and turn them into a reality? What is the methodology, the framework that we can adopt, not just for the occupant, but maybe also for the building operator?
And to start with, I have to touch point on both Tom, Betsy, and Kyle when they started talking about the importance of data, the importance of metrics, and the importance to be able to secure the infrastructure that provides those metrics for you. So that's why the first step is to plan out. What is the objective and goal that you're planning for? What is going to be your portfolio strategy? If you look at a portfolio like ours, we've got different buildings with different types of organizations with different types of user profiles. How do you design that space or that building to meet the user profiles or demographics of the people that are going to use that space? Once you move up from there, you then start talking about the architecture, the physical layout, the design of the building, the design of the space. Ultimately, beautiful buildings do attract people. Some buildings are designed specifically for purposes that they're created for. So moving from plan to talking about how should I design the building that is going to spark the curiosity, that's going to spark the interactions. Then talking about the infrastructure. Ultimately, buildings have always been collecting data for generations, right? And no one can say a building does not collect that data. But what Tom said, acting on that data is what it's all about. So for us, it's choosing the infrastructure in a building that would allow us to be able to capture the data points that I need not only for today, but also for tomorrow. Right, enhancing the growth to cater to different generations of people that are going to walk through the doors of that building. So taking care of the infrastructure, taking care of the structured cabling, taking care about the layout and the placement of the devices, choosing the various automation and control systems that go into the building. Finally, moving up from there is all about the platform. I have to extract this data and weave all of this data together. And that typically would mean the need of a platform that would allow me to merge the data and use that data to provide an integrated experience. And once I've achieved that, I then can pick and choose the various types of experiences that I would like to roll out. So for us, it's about starting with a plan, focusing on the environment, building out the infrastructure, creating a platform, and catering to the experience. But from my perspective, both these worlds have to come down together. You can't do top down, neither can you do bottom up. It's about merging the experiences that you want to achieve based on the building that you're looking at and coming to middle ground to say, these are the experiences that occupants want, and to cater to these experiences, this is the plan and the infrastructure that I create. And at the same time, this is the infrastructure that I have, and these experiences can be enhanced as we move into the future because the infrastructure allows for those enhancements, adaptations, and evolutions of the experience based on the participants and the occupants that come into that space. So it's a top-down combined with a bottom-up approach.
Thanks, Emmanuel. We're making what is a complex topic quite simple, and that's a nice, clear, and crystallized framework around some approaches we can take. And And Tom, another approach I'd like to talk to you about, if as we look at the built environment and expanding on the need to satisfy also the building owners, the operators, we need to take into consideration the building's age. Is it old? Is it modern? Maybe it's a building under construction. We haven't built it yet across the portfolio of the people that manage these buildings. How is the smart building approach different to each of these examples?
Yeah, Steve, so I'd say more generally, either you're building, as you said, a new design construction building, design development, or it's an existing building or portfolio. So in the new, hopefully it would be apparent to our audience that you would start the right way, right? With this fourth utility backbone, non-proprietary systems, because that makes your data cheaper and more accessible in perpetuity. And then cybersecurity requirements, not only for the networking and remote access, but down at the contractor level in every single contractor, rigid requirements. So the backbone open and secure. And now you're enabled to do all kinds of use cases, get all kinds of data, and we all agree that there needs to be defined use cases, but you're ready for that as that comes and as that changes. For existing buildings, sometimes people, I think, get a little stuck on this one because they think about rip and replace or all the things that they have to do to a so-called dumb building. But really, it's not that complicated, because what we do is, the first thing we do is inventory what digital systems are in the building, control systems, what contractor and capabilities are there, and how those things are connected. And if I know those things, and by the way, digital systems is not a smart building thing. That's been since the mid-'80s that all control systems have been made digital. So I don't want the audience to get hung up. I've got an old building. If it was built or renovated in the last 40 years, you probably have digital systems, just statistically speaking. So, and once I've got that inventory, Steve, what we do is we have a use case library that has recipes in it. So now I look at the ingredients in your building and I see what recipes that can satisfy. So rather than starting with a new list and then turning to your building, we start at the building and then turn to what's possible. And I think that's a very empowering and highly leveraged way for people with an existing portfolio to get lots of use cases they never imagined because they have digital systems.
So thanks for that context, Tom. It is really interesting that the misperception that a 40-year-old building is not digital. And I think a lot of the conversations today are pre and post COVID. So what I want to do is make sure we address the topic that we promised to today and just change it a little bit and pivot towards maybe over to Betsy. Is it true, in order to have a smart building in today's world, it has to be a healthy building? And if that's the case, what is a healthy building?
So fair, great question, Steve. So a smart building has to be a healthy building in this new normal. You can't just be smart and not be healthy. They're complementary to each other. With regards to healthy buildings, what we're really seeing is occupants want to know that the building has the means to identify and respond to health issues. And building owners and operators will actually need to reassure their occupants it's safe for them to go back to their buildings. So the new standards will require real-time and transparent insights into the actions that a building owner is taking to monitor and manage hygiene, improve air quality, and implement social distancing. And reassurance is actually really important, right? I mean, reassurance actually will take in the form of new procedures from, limiting conference room participants or elevator passengers, but it will also rely on clear and frequent communication based on what's happening in the building. And we believe that we can actually help buildings become healthier and meet their energy savings goals.
That is a great goal. And Tom, as we talk about this topic of healthy buildings, the focus as we look at what's occurring in the last few months seems to be more about public health. So where do the two meet, and what is the role of a smart building when it comes to public health?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I would like to delineate, and it sounds like hair splitting, but wellness, as Betsy was talking about, and she described both, has been about being healthier, being more productive, lower CO2, all these things that are good, right? But that's not exactly the same thing when we say public health, which is more about avoiding serious issues like obviously coronavirus, but also Legionella and carbon monoxide. And so just a slight delineation between health and healthy buildings and public health. And to your point about smart buildings, your question about smart buildings, obviously people had to react with stickers and tape and those kind of things, but we all know, let's forget a smart building. In a modern building that you're going to have a property management function in, that's going to have to get a little more automated and a little more measurable and so forth. So in other words, social distancing, it won't just be stickers. It'll be CO2 sensors and occupancy sensors and video cameras, things that we already have, as we said earlier. How can I repoint those and repurpose those? Or we mentioned the touchless entry, connecting the access control to the door, to the elevator, to the digital signage. So I think most people did the right thing with signs and stickers, but we all agree that even after this settles a bit, there's going to be a new normal, and really for all of us in this digital control system and data world, it's not as hard as the public would think. We're going to point the power of those digital systems to a new set of use cases, and I think we're a lot further, we're a lot closer to that than people think.
And Emmanuel, how have the recent changes affected your smart building strategies?
So ultimately for us, the goal is people would still like to have the same experiences. You don't change your way of life. And how it's affected us is how we able to offer those experiences without compromising on emotional and physical health. What has to change in terms of how that service is going to be consumed? Okay, is the change have to do with the points of interaction in terms of choosing the service? Does the change have to do with consuming the service and the physical space that they are in? So that really asks us to ask us a fundamental question. The experience is something that is going to remain, but how the experience is going to be consumed so that we are able to drive better physical wellness and better emotional wellness of occupants in that building is causing us to enhance the way the experiences have been designed. For example, if you're going to walk into a building, how are you going to ensure that the air in that building, along with the occupants that you're with, is clean? How do you take care of all the particular viruses or the other particulate matter that you have in the air? Now, you always had sensors to do this, right? You always had air quality sensors that go into a building. But today, with the onset of it, how do I drive engagement of that space to guarantee to the users, look, it is much safer, everything is operating as per normal, so you can enjoy the same quality and high level of collaboration, brainstorming, and engagement that you would. Driving that surety is how we are enhancing our experiences today to ensure people feel more comfortable doing what they always have done and thereby empowering them to be more productive.
Let's see if we can articulate this problem a little bit further with Kyle. This current pandemic is maybe an opportunity that we can get us thinking outside the building. As if we change the rules of space utilization, Emmanuel focused a lot around the space in those last few conversations. But if we change the rules for physical distancing, de-densification, and having to justify the cost of the floor space, yet still appreciate what we're doing right now, working from home, right? How do we take advantage of these competing dynamics?
Well, Steve, we're in a very unique paradox right now. So if you look at these three categories today, right now, very large percentage of the populace is working from home, right? And if you take these things at face value, if we have everybody work from home, common sense dictates, okay, we're not going to need as much space, right? You're looking at it from a real estate occupier or an owner, right? Then you look at physical distancing, right? So I need more space to accommodate for social distancing so that I can welcome the populace back into the office building or whatever intelligent building that we're referring to, right? So common sense dictates, okay, well, we need to either maintain our current square footprint or we need to even expand it to accommodate for those social distancing protocols that they're looking to implement. Then you look at affordability of the space. And right now we're in a situation where if you think about an owner of real estate, right, the revenues aren't quite coming in. They're not getting their lease payments coming in. So, but at the same time, where because of these new policies, these new things that we are trying to implement, we're asking investment into this space and asking them to spend to enable them to be able to achieve these new use cases and outcomes that are at the top of everyone's list. So I think right now, and if we think back to when Emmanuel was speaking to someone walking into a space and utilizing data to unlock different services and how do we achieve an experience, I think in the same vein, you have to think about, well, how are we now going to leverage the data to redefine how space is being utilized? You know, do we need more space? Does this space that was pre-COVID utilized for one experience now need to be adjusted and changed to enable a new experience for an occupant or an employee or a tenant, right? So I think, again, it goes back to data being king and making sure that you're aggregating these data points from IoT sensors, from air quality, from occupancy, you know, Wi-Fi triangulation, beaconization, all these different ways that we can get geospatial intelligence on where people are, how they're utilizing the space, the air quality, and making sure that everything is sanitary and that people feel safe. All of this comes into play, but it all results in on how are we utilizing the data in that space to be able to achieve what they're asking for and what we're going to have to do in the new norm.
Yeah, interesting challenge. And maybe, Emmanuel, is this example of the world we're in right now an example of an accidental collision? And therefore, is it a chance for true innovation?
I think it is. I think the opportunity that we've driven today is it's not just about space, but about driving innovation of how do we get people to engage and consume the space that's being created for them. And that in turn is going to spur rapid innovation where people are going to say, how do I drive better engagement? How do I drive faster productivity? Like I said, working from home, and to Kyle's really good point, it's all about planned meetings. It's all about setting my agenda, setting my schedule, you know, working back to back. But what that does is it is going to slow down creativity and innovation because I'm not interacting, sharing, bouncing ideas of people. So the innovation is going to happen when people then realize, how do I boost and accelerate the pace of which I'm going to drive innovation and empowerment? And that is going to open up greater avenues of accelerated innovation where people will now say, hey, you know what, I'm going to figure out how I'm going to drive effective utilization of this space so people will actually want to use this space and get people to come to that space. And that, to me, Steve, is going to spur innovation even more rapidly.
Great. I know we're running out of time. I've just had the nudge. So I'm not sure how much time I'm going to have for Q&A, but I do want to put this one on the table. We've talked about a lot of theoretical concepts here. Can you just take us through a practical example of facility public health and what it could do to solve a problem within a built environment?
Sure, and just real briefly, I just want to add to what Kyle and Emmanuel said about the design and that kind of thinking. I don't think in 16 years we've ever spent so much time with architects whose customers are requiring them and they're agreeing that there should be no separation between design and smart buildings, especially in this pandemic world. So it's very interesting. You talk, Steve, about this opportunistic innovation. It used to be they would just do design, and then there'd be the MEP engineering, and then where are the smart building guys, right down this serial kind of path. And now they're saying the entire space of the entire building is going to be, there's no daylight between design and smart buildings for this purpose. And Steve, a couple things that I'll be brief is that one, we realized that everybody was talking about occupants, tenants, and the public in terms of health screening and all these kind of things. And our good friends in the contractor community were not generally part of that conversation. So we developed an app, not to be a commercial, just to emphasize this segment. We developed an app that is for contractors and contractor health risk screening. They have different contracts, they have different HR situation, different relationships to everybody, different dynamics. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, as I've already alluded to, won't repeat it too much, is that we're taking this public health use cases from the point of what systems already exist that we can use those ingredients for the recipes for public health use cases. And that seems to be as Kyle mentioned, with rent rates strained and revenue strained, it's not a time to start lurching towards large CapEx things that may not be as applicable in a year. So digital system inventory is where we're starting.
So lots of great practical examples are out there. We've just been given the wrap. So we don't have time for Q&A, but we do have time for Q&A because we are in a virtual world and we can answer them later on today, and we'll make sure we collect those. So make sure you send them through the Connected Real Estate platform, maybe even join the chat room for Smart Buildings. So again, I'd like to acknowledge and thank our experienced panel today for their great insight and their thoughts, and hopefully solving the question of what is a smart building and what is it not. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
See you.